This last video for Chapter 9, or at least the last video that I'm making, there's I think one more video that you'll be watching, is going to talk about how to read Spss output and how to report those statistics in the literature. So in the literature, we're reporting whether or not the test was significant. We wouldn't say in the literature that we rejected the null hypothesis or we failed to reject the null hypothesis. We want to say whether or not the results were significant. So when we reject the null, we would use the word significant. When we fail to reject the null hypothesis, we say not significant. And again, this is the idea of this null hypothesis significance testing. And there is a little bit of a move away from doing just this, and that's why we've learned about effect size. So in addition to reporting the significance and at a certain p-value, you would also report the effect size or confidence interval, something. Most of the time in the literature now, you'll see that is done. We'll get into reporting that, how to report confidence intervals and those types of things a little bit later in the semester. This is just an introduction to how to write things in the literature. So we're going to report the T statistic value. So this is your calculated T, including degrees of freedom. Now, you're going to be doing some of this like on a test. I might ask you to write how you would report it in the literature based on your calculated T. But for this last little part of this chapter, what I want you to do is also understand how to interpret SPSS data, because that would have been, we would have been having a lab this week, and you would have been going to MBCC, trying out the SPSS calculations. But it's the same thing. It's their calculated, in the SPSS, it's their calculated T statistics, not the critical T, and the degrees of freedom. So this is just an example of what it would look like. So here you're saying you're doing a T-test. That's what the T stands for. Here's your degrees of freedom. And this is your calculated T. And when you are doing it by hand, the calculations by hand, and you have a significance level of 0.05, you would write it this way. When we do it via SPSS, we're going to write what our exact specific p-value was. So this would be what I would be looking for in terms of the format if I asked you to report what you'd see in the literature for your calculations. So, and like I said before, if you're using SPSS, you report the exact probability, whatever that might be, and I'll show you how to find that in the table. All right, so this is what SPSS output looks like. And for this test, and you're going to have to be able to interpret this. And so you'll see you have an SPSS assignment where it asks you to read through to understand a little bit about the study so that you can interpret it properly and write up something properly about this. So here, this output up here, and this is, again, this is for a one sample t-test, which is what we've done in this chapter. First, it's going to spit out, okay, here, the n, that's telling you your sample size. Here's the mean. This is that calculated mean. Here's the standard deviation that they've calculated, and here's standard error. So all stuff that we've done, but SPSS just does it for you. Now you come down here, and this is that calculated T statistic. So this is the T that you would report. Here's the degrees of freedom, because again, n was 15. Degrees of freedom is n minus 1 for t-tests. Our significance, this is your p-value. And then this stuff, we're going to ignore this. And then the confidence intervals are important, but we're going to come back and talk about those a little bit later in the semester. So here's would be how this would be reported in the literature. Now I'm going to show you the different components and where I got them. So those are my degrees of freedom. That's my t-value. And that's my p-value. Now, if you were doing this on your own without an SPSS, this again is just the degrees of freedom for your calculations. This is your calculated p, and here it would be whatever significance level you set. But because we had a specific output here, a specific p-value, we're going to put that here. And then it tells you the default is a two-tailed test. And then just here's that mean. And that's important because all this information we're going to report on the next slide. I'm going to show you a little write-up of what it would look like. So here, this is just what I'm looking for your SPSS assignment. A one sample t-test was done in SPSS to determine if the test scores in Class A are significantly different than the average test scores for the country. The results indicate that Class A performed better on a cognitive test, and there's the mean, than the national average. And then there I report the T. And if we go back to this slide, we can see that's the mean that I reported, and here's my reporting of my T statistic. And that's where I got that information. And if you're wondering how I knew to call it Class A, then the general population, it was from this video that you're going to be watching. And so I basically took the output from that data and utilized it to give you an example write-up. In addition, just remember, you can use this as a template, right? You can use this as kind of when you're going to do your write-up, you just have to, I don't want the words to be identical. You have to, you'll have to change it for, like cognitive test wouldn't be the same, Class A wouldn't be the same, but you can use this as kind of your template to write it up, plugging in some of these other values from the output that you're given for the assignment.